morning. Hope you're all well. We're talking about water, right, today, and climate change and the impact on water and our health. But look at today. It's suddenly, if you've never been to India, this is monsoon season. This is what monsoon season feels like in India. It's like humid, sticky, slightly wet, but also very hot. And it's amazing that in Brussels we're experiencing monsoon, like a monsoon season in effect. My name is Ramendra Kanani. I have the great pleasure to moderate this launch of a report and a conversation about water matters, about the impact of climate change on water and our health more broadly. Before I say a few words, I just want to do some housekeeping. So I want to welcome our audience online. Thank you for joining us, and you are not lost, because if you want to ask a question, please go on to the Slido and hashtag FOE debate. So it's hashtag FOE debate, and on Slido or Slido, whichever way you would pronounce it. But welcome to you also, those of you who are joining us on live stream. So today, we are here to launch this significant report from the European Environment Agency, as well as the Observatory Climate. I always get this wrong. The European Commission's, I think it's the Climate Observatory. And we will have senior folk from both to respond, but also, firstly, we're going to have a presentation on the report itself. Some facts and figures to frame our debate. Some 1 in 8, so 1 in 8 Europeans live in areas potentially prone to river flooding, while 30% of people living in southern Europe are affected by water stress. And what we know is that droughts and extremities of weather and very changing weather is only going to increase. And it's likely to have an impact on, and you know this, I hope already, the impact of extremities of weather and climate change is disproportionately impacted on those who are in minority groups, those who are not materially in the same circumstances as we are, and are especially poor, and living in very poor conditions and housing that is actually not fit for purpose for the century ahead. So we know it has a differential impact, and we need to be real about the fact that this is going to have an impact, increasingly so, on those groups. But there are other things that very little attention has been given to, and that is on the impact on our health, our physical health, obviously, when you have disasters like flooding and other such matters, but also mental health. A very little known discussion that actually, when especially children and young people, when they are hearing and listening and watching and experiencing the impact of extreme weather, we have no idea of the impact of what's happening on their brain and their neuroscience development and their sense of insecurity about the world and feeling very, very threatened and vulnerable. And we lose sight of that. But also, we lose sight of the fact there are older generations who have not lived through this, let's say, a different kind of world than we're living in, feel incredibly vulnerable and isolated, and are often at the sharp end of the impact of climate change. So just worth noting that we need to think about this in a more holistic way, and it's not just about the politics of water. It is a political issue. We have to think about the politics of climate action, but make sure that we create a different kind of competence in our governance about how we manage societies and how we deal with municipalities and how we prepare for the shocks of climate change, and make sure that it's fitted into the governance of arrangements locally, nationally, and internationally. And let's see, why, these are laudable words, but we have little sign of that actually having an impact in terms of measurable, practical steps being taken by some of our leaders to really deal with the issue ahead of us. 2 really important things. Let's remember, and I'm going to hand over to the Executive Director of the European Environment Agency to present the report. Our infrastructure is simply not prepared for what we're about to receive into the future. It's absolutely the case. Majority of our housing, 70% of our housing, is not fit for purpose. And a lot of our systems, municipalities, are not flood-proof. They're not climate change proof. The other thing is, we are not preparing young adults and communities about what to do when there is a sudden flood, a sudden shock to the system in terms of climate change, and you're seeing, water everywhere, or you're seeing drought everywhere, or you simply cannot live an ordinary life because the impact of climate change. That sense of awareness raising is absolutely key, and we need to really be mindful of that. On those really sad notes, which I hope are not sad. They're just a wake-up call, I think, for all of us. That let's just get real about what the issues are, and let's move from talking to action. On that point, can I invite you to take the floor and present the report? Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. I hope you hear me well, and thank you for the great introduction to my parts of indeed sharing the facts and figures and the messages of our new report. I understand that this should work like this. This is always exciting. I mean,
I know.
Does it react or not? And it now doesn't seem to.
I'm completely technologically ridiculous.
Okay.
There you go. Had nothing to do with me.
So, over the recent years, indeed, Europe has already seen devastating floods, once-in-a-generation droughts, continuing sea level rise, and increasing temperatures in lake and seawater. In some cases, the effects of human health are, of course, very direct and obvious, like casualties in floods. There are, however, as we already heard, many others, more like hidden impacts. And these could be the effects of drought on the mental health of farmers who are losing their livelihood, or diseases caused by increased prevalence of pathogens and toxins. In the few minutes I have today, I will present some top-line findings of this EEA report, which looks at the health effects arising from climate change impacts with a specific focus on water, so floods, droughts, and water quality. Great. Back in March, our agency published its European Climate Risk Assessment, EUCRA. It looks at climate change-related risks and groups them in 5 main clusters that you can see on the slide. One of the clusters is health, with heat stress, wildfire risk, and poorly adapted buildings highlighted as areas requiring particularly urgent action. Whilst EUCRA points out key risks and identifies risk ownerships, it does not focus so much on concrete solutions. And the report that we are launching today complements, hence, EUCRA with a strong focus on responses and solutions. Water is the most important resource required to maintain life, and its availability and quality can never be taken for granted. This report deals with the risks to human health from changes in water quantity and quality resulting from climate change. And it also assesses our preparedness for ongoing and future impacts by examining the current policy landscape in Europe, and it seeks to inspire action by showcasing examples of practical measures that we can take. The report is indeed produced under the auspices of the European Climate and Health Observatory, which is a European a partnership between the European Commission, the European Environment Agency, and several other organizations. It is the second climate change and health report produced under by the observatory, and the first was focusing more on the health and heat and infectious diseases. So also important to still remember. Ongoing and accelerating climate change is already leading to deaths, injuries, and the increasing incidence of non-communicable diseases, as well as outbreaks of infectious diseases and mental health consequences. And the numbers speak for themselves. As we heard, 1 in 8 Europeans currently live in areas potentially prone to river flooding. And while many of those areas have flood defenses, the level of security they offer varies quite, a lot. And development, so buildings, continued also in these risk areas. At the same time, permanent water stress affects 30% of people in southern Europe, as we also heard, with water restrictions and rationing are already in place in many of these regions. Water quality for drinking and bathing, it is summer, and this is also in our minds. And while it's generally good across Europe, is also at risk. So rising air and water temperatures facilitate pathogen growth, increasing the risk of waterborne diseases. Furthermore, water quality may be also jeopardized by floods. 15% of industrialized facilities across Europe are located in flood-prone areas, while combined sewage overflows can discharge untreated water after heavy rainfall, basically in many places. The climate impacts on health via water are, of course, rather complex. Different individuals are affected differently, depending on where they are, who they are, where they live, where they work or go to school, how the services they rely on are affected by flooding or drought. For example, as also mentioned in the introduction, the elderly or children, those with pre-existing diseases or health problems, and lower socioeconomic groups tend to be most severely affected. The elderly may have problems evacuating their homes during floods, as we saw in the devastating floods in Germany in 2021. Children tend to be more easily traumatized by witnessing floods or wildfires, and poorer households may compromise even on hygiene if increasing water prices mean they struggle to pay actually the water bills. Exposure to impacts also varies. Southern Europe, for example, emerges as a real hotspot for water scarcity and certain infectious diseases such as West Nile virus. In rural areas, more people may rely on private wells for water, which tend to be more affected by extreme weather. And rescue workers, or those involved in cleanup operations after flood, for example, may face more risk of infectious diseases through contact with dirty water. So it's also an occupational health issue. Finally, cascading impacts become evident. Water treatment methods may need to be adapted to deal with more concentrated pollution resulting from droughts. Floods affecting hospitals or schools may mean disrupted treatment for patients or interrupted education for children. And the impact of droughts on agriculture and food production may mean not just economic and mental health difficulties for farmers, but also price increases and lower availability of fresh produce, in particular to the lower income households. One example of an indirect impact of droughts and water scarcity I mentioned in the previous slide is the increased risk of West Nile virus infections, particularly in Eastern and Southern Europe. And I didn't think of this when I heard about it. It was a surprise to me. This chart shows the number of regions reporting transmission between 2010 and 2022. West Nile virus is spread by Culex mosquitoes. It is more likely to cause infections in humans in years with dry summers following wet springs. In dry periods, pools of stagnant water have higher organic content, meaning that the mosquito larvae have more food, while lack of regularly heavy rainfall reduces flushing of the larvae. And droughts also cause mosquitoes and birds, which are reservoir hosts of this virus, to congregate around remaining water sources and human settlements as well. And this can enhance the transmission of pathogens and increase the risk of outbreaks among humans. And at the same time, the drought reduces the population of frogs and other insect predators, allowing these mosquitoes then to thrive. Sharing knowledge and best practice can be a really effective way to improve societal resilience to floods and droughts. Our report presents examples of solutions at various stages of disaster management. But let me be clear, it's always better to stay on the right-hand side, so prevention, preparedness, instead of response and recovery. Examples include nature-based solutions, which can help to reduce the risk of floods, while recharging groundwater aquifers and improving water quality. Awareness raising, both among the general public and the healthcare professionals. Establishing well-communicating surveillance and early warning systems. And ensuring that hospitals, homes, schools, and water infrastructure are themselves resilient to climate change. Many initiatives to address these issues are already in place across Europe, and we have collected information about the on-the-ground initiatives from member countries, subnational stakeholders and other actors. And here are just a few examples. On the prevention side, sewage improvement projects in Italy to prevent overflow into bathing water, or nature-based solutions to reduce flood risk at hospitals in Denmark. In preparedness, we find examples of monitoring and control systems for Ciguatera fish poisoning in Spain or West Nile virus in Greece. Moving to responses, examples include transboundary actions in response to flooding in the Sava River basin or post-flooding mental health support in Germany. And finally, in the recovery phase, examples include specialized insurance schemes which can give people peace of mind and reduce the stress linked to the weather extremes. What is needed now is indeed concerted effort to roll out and upscale this type of solution further. Even though this report focuses on health impacts can be prevented, of course, by actions in other sectors too. So this is really important to see the whole system. Climate-aware special planning and resilient built environments are key to reducing people's exposure to water-related risks. Among the most important preventive medium-term measures are avoiding further development in risk areas, implementing nature-based solutions, and designing buildings to ensure their resilience to floods, fires, and droughts. In the insurance sector, closing the protection gap and ensuring affordability can ease the mental load for those who are at risk of large uninsured losses, such as farmers or low-income households. And crucially, of course, we need also research and innovation, investment, assessing the effectiveness, co-benefits and trade-offs of various adaptation solutions. Europe is, in principle, well equipped to act on these imperatives. We have sufficient evidence of impacts, solid policy framework, and examples of successful actions implemented across the continent. But we must now step up to protect the health and well-being of European citizens and residents from one of the biggest health risk, climate change. So I thank you for your attention. I see that the QR code of the report is everywhere, so this is well distributed. So thank you very much.
Lena, thank you so much. That's really helpful. And yes, please. It's a very rich report, and it's very difficult to condense it. And you've done a good job at pulling out the key issues that we all need to be thinking about. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a set of perspectives, one about climate policy and the other about health policy. So, can I invite yourself to, Elena? Yes, indeed. And firstly, I'm going to ask Philippe, who should be online. We just wait to connect him. He's definitely there. I've spoken to him. Hello. Are you on mute, perhaps?
No.
We can hear you. We can hear you now. It's perfect. It's all right. It's great. Thank you for joining us to this conversation. You've now, both of you, I mean, we're going to take a climate health policy conversation or takeaway, and then in terms of, what the kind of two different takes on policy implications as a result of the report. So, Philippe, I'm going to go to you first. From the health perspective, what are the implications for health policy in Europe from the report that you read as being important? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dharmendra. First, perhaps let me say that I'm sorry not to be able to be here physically with you. I know it's always better, and I'm very sorry for that. But I'm still very honored to be with you today for celebrating the launch of the second biennial report on the Climate and Health Observatory. For me, this report marks a significant milestone in our ongoing efforts to understand and address the complex interplay between climate change and human health, as you have mentioned. And it's I want you to allow me to express first my great appreciation to Lina for providing us with a comprehensive insight into the findings of the report that are very impressive. And I would like also to extend my gratitude to the team at the EEA for their commitment and exceptional diligence in producing such an exceptional output. The report reminds us again of the profound implications that climate change has on our health, well-being, and wealth. We have all witnessed it. The devastating floods and prolonged drought observed in the recent years have not only wreaked a woe on our environment, but have also had profound implications for human health. The rise in heat-related illnesses, the displacement of communities, and the disruption of essential services serve as stark reminders for the urgent need for action. This report stands as a pivotal milestone, shedding light on the key area of action, and that's important to me. From the spread of waterborne disease to the exacerbation of respiratory conditions, the impact of these climate-related events on public health cannot be overstated. So to come back to your question, actually, considering this pressing challenge, the report provides invaluable insight into the way in which climate phenomena intersects with human health, shedding light on the risk we face and the intervention needed to mitigate them. These insights can help us in the Commission, but also in the Member States, in understanding what is at stake and taking the right measures to prepare for the health impact of extreme weather events. By equipping policymakers with evidence-based recommendations, we can better safeguard the health and well-being of our communities in the face of this changing climate. To face this challenge, collaboration and solidarity are more important than ever. By working together across sectors and borders, we can develop holistic strategies to build resilience, protect our vulnerable positions, and mitigate the health impact of the climate change. And I'm very proud that the Commission is playing a role in this. Proud that the Directorate General for Health and Food Safety, the Directorate General for Climate Action, and the European Environment Agency decided back in 2021 to set up the Climate and Health Observatory. The report we are celebrating today is part of this initiative and is one important step to understanding and addressing the impact of climate change and health. We will take in the Commission this report as a basis for our discussions with the Member States' public health authorities. We will ensure that its findings informs action at national and sub-national levels. Together with our partners in the European Climate Change Observatory, we will enable Member States to effectively leverage the recommendations presented in this report and to take decisive actions to safeguard the health and well-being of current and future generations. Again, congratulations to the European Environment Agency to this excellent piece of work. Thank you.
Philippe, thank you very much. That's very helpful to hear how you intend to leverage it amongst member states, but also make sure there is some resonance, especially at the sub-regional and local level, because actually locality matters in this particular debate, because everything's about what will happen at a local level and how local infrastructure and public education can cope with what's about to hit us in the next few decades. Then I want to come to you now from a climate policy perspective. We have a plethora of things going on, right? We've got the Green Deal, we've had lots of funding on different areas of climate change and to mitigate or adapt to climate change, let's say, and the impact of it. For you, what are the key takeaways for climate policy?
Thank you very much. I know that you are very tough on time management, but I will still start with the acknowledgement, because I want to thank the department responsible for health, the European Environment Agency, the World Health Organization, and all the partners that have been involved in the European Climate and Health Observatory for the tough work, because this is really growing into a unique, interdisciplinary and agile initiative. So thank you very much for that. And also, of course, the report that has been launched is again a proof of the European Environment Agency's prowess and high standards in drafting such a report and the value of the partnership. Now, to your question, Dharmendra, what are the key ways from the climate perspective? Well, first of all, I would really underline the fact that the report sharpens our understanding of how, to which degree the climate-related water problems becomes actually also public health threats. And bringing the health dimension into the spotlight is very important for our work on climate adaptation and resilience, and looking at the climate risks from the water quantity and water quality perspective. Another important point is that the climate impacts on health through water are very complex. You know, by no way is it so simple. So the solutions need to be systemic. And this is how we think in the adaptation policies. Adaptation area is really for people who have the capacity to think in complex terms, but I actually also propose solutions. So from sewage systems that we've seen in Lena's slides, to hospital operations, from tourism to farming, or from water management to infectious diseases surveillance, we have seen there are many solutions proposed. Third takeaway is that indeed Europe, and this comes also from the European climate risk assessment, Europe is woefully not prepared what is there to come. And the progress so far has been rather broad-based instead of very targeted. And fourth, this brings me to the point of, so how can we strengthen our policies to bring also the population with us and to provide the confidence that we are ready to face the storm, flood, heat wave, and so on. So some of the responses are already in the communication that the Commission issued in March this year on managing climate risks. And of course, a lot of work is happening in the observatory. Second, the Commission will also issue the assessment of the river basin management plans. And this is very important. It sounds like, again, a very bureaucratic jargon, but this shows where we are with the water quantity and water quality and demand supply in Europe. And while the water resilience initiative is still being considered and the format and timing is not yet decided, I think the report clearly provides very critical input to these processes. And there are elements that we can consider. First, the importance of climate proofing of infrastructure. You mentioned it in your opening, so that making them really fit for the decades to come. Investing more into the room for water in rivers, so that we reduce the flood risks. Encouraging the reuse of urban wastewater, and of course with the appropriate treatment so we don't create the health risks or outbreaks. Measures to lower the water temperatures so that we reduce the risk of bacterial infection. So these are all elements that come out very clearly from the report and can be used as such for the next policy initiatives. And again, big applause to everyone who has contributed to this report. And as I said at the beginning, for me, these are special moments where we should celebrate a good work done, but of course also reflect how we bring it forward so that it doesn't stay only as a report, but it is taken over in policy responses.
Thank you. And you stuck to time. Not that time is the major issue, because content matters, and that was really good content. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The one thing that strikes me is that it feels like it's important to say the words that this should be interdisciplinary, multi-stakeholder, and a whole system approach, right? But the sense is, who owns the agenda? Is it everybody and nobody? Who owns the system? And that's the question that we need to ask ourselves as we think about when you said the things that you do in terms of policy and the need to implement this. Does a mayor or the chief executive of a local authority see this as their agenda? And how do they make sure that it happens? And I think these are the kind of questions we absolutely need to address if the fine words and the brilliant report you've put together reaches and has the impact on people and communities. Because, for example, when you see that, let's take here in the lowlands of Brussels, and you have like 10 inches of rain. That's the equivalent of what rainfall over 5 years, right? In an hour, right? That community hasn't got a clue, and no one knows what to do. So how do you make sure that you use your, how does the infrastructure of, let's say, a mobile phone sends alerts to people to know what to do, for example? So you use technology as a force for good rather than a force for bad. However, I'm now going to take two perspectives. We're going to bring in Oliver from the World Health Organization and Lisbeth from the Dutch, as you can see, the Dutch National Institute. So it's like a WHO perspective, and then we're going to have also Lisbeth, who's going to speak around the issues that we have in terms of a local perspective on mental health. And basically, we also have Guy Howard, and Guido will be, who are online, but we'll come to them in a moment. First, I want to take Oliver. From your perspective, you've read the report and you've been congratulated amongst all the other agencies about the importance of this. Have we made sufficient progress? Which seems like a really stupid and dull question, but where do you see this in terms of, are we really understanding the signals? Because these are signals that we're seeing from the world, the planet. Are we making sufficient progress? And what do you think needs to be done to address water and sanitation-based related, changes, impact, climate change impact on health?
So first of all, unavoidably, I will need to say the same as Elena. Bravo to everyone who has been producing this report. I think this is a significant piece of work, and I'm very happy also to see that particularly that report has a health lens, and thereby also putting water on the mills of our work on climate change and health that we have been advocating for in the World Health Organization for many years. So congrats to everyone who has contributed to this report. This is really fantastic. On your question, I guess we can be cheerful in some areas.
That's good.
I think we have seen, particularly in the governance and the regulatory space, progress to address issues related to climate, water and health. Let me simply remind you, for example, of the Floods Directive. That is already a little bit aged, but that was a game changer at the time to be introduced in the European context. Think of the Drought Observatory that provides early warning information to local levels also, and how to, and getting ready to possible water scarcity and drought events. So there are mechanisms already in place that we can use and that we can play in order to get ready to the impacts of climate change. I'm also very happy on the governance level to see that the new Drinking Water Directive, for example, makes explicit reference to climate-related risks, and it encourages member states to take into consideration in their risk assessments for drinking water supplies, for example, to specifically zoom into this risk. So there is an explicit reference to this. And I think there are really promising developments on the governance and regulatory levels. However, of course, more needs to be done. And I think we could open a newspaper on any day and we will see the impacts, and we know that we need to do more. What I would like to emphasize, however, is that we probably also will need to look beyond infrastructural investments. Infrastructure is very important to strengthen resilience, but I also would like to bring into the picture the need for strengthening management and operation of drinking water supply and sanitation system, to undertake on-site risk assessments, to understand the specificities of the impact of climate change to specific systems, and to come up with operational and managerial responses that complement the infrastructural responses to it. And I think that would, having a strong focus on the managerial response is also important to get ready for diverse risks that come through the climate, through the water, and through the sanitation system. So I would like to highlight that element particularly. Secondly, we in WHO have been advocating the same lot. We have been advocating that all water and sanitation system operators should actually develop risk-based management plans. We call them water safety plans and sanitation safety plans. And there's a lot of talk at the moment on how these plans can take particularly consideration of climate resilience. And we see more and more promising examples coming forward that these climate risks are actually being considered in local risk management. And finally, another point that is unavoidably to mention is we need to make sure also that health facilities themselves become resilient. We just had in the past 2 days a meeting in WHO where we were looking at health sector climate action to be taken and making health facilities resilient to floods, to droughts. Investing in infrastructure and in management is an investment into health protection because people turn to health facilities when they are most in need due to the effects of climate change.
Okay, great, thank you. I suppose the question, not for you to answer, but for you to think about, is that I find it farcical, perhaps it's just me, that disaster recovery planning and scenario planning isn't a leadership competence now in this world that we live in. It should be an absolute facet of a leader's accountability, absolutely. The other thing is, who holds the water authorities to account? Where's the check and balance there? Where's the police person to make sure that water authorities are doing the right thing? And I don't know the answer to that question, but we'll come back to that. Elizabeth, over to you. The Netherlands, in the reports cited that the flooding that happened in 2021 had mostly significantly an impact on mental health. So say a little bit about how that scenario, that situation enabled you to think about what needs to happen in terms of combining the the climate institutes, let's say, or environment institutes, together with public health.
Yes, that's correct. We know that people that suffer a natural hazard, be it flooding or wildfires, that can have enormous impact on your mental health. You can suffer losses, of course, your possessions, perhaps even loved ones, you'll be evacuated. That can put enormous strain on people. And so they need that support in place because people otherwise will get depressed, anxious, PTSD, and in the worst case. So what we need is to have psychosocial support in place, and that needs to be part of the whole preparedness planning for an emergency. So we have our organizations and our networks in place. So when there is an event like a flooding event, we can quickly install, for example, an information advice center. So that's like a one-stop shop. So people can go to that one point of contact for all the advice and help. They're not kind of groping around in the dark, which again is very stressful. People need clarity, so they need to know, if they can go back to their homes, how long they're going to be evacuated for. So we need that single point of contact and get that organized and up and running really quickly. We also need to monitor health. We have at the moment a questionnaire which we've developed for the physical and mental health effects of a natural disaster. So those are validated questions. So we can roll that out in the case of a flooding event. So we can monitor the health, see what needs there are. And also it's very interesting, of course, to if there are more events to look back on for research purposes as well. And of course, we need to include mental health in our risk assessment, our national risk assessments and vulnerability assessments. So we know who are the vulnerable groups, where are the vulnerable populations, and that can then inform our interventions. So of course we need to make communities more resilient, we need to make individuals more resilient, people need to be aware of the risks. I mean, it's quite tricky because in the Netherlands we have, for example, a website. You can put in your postcode and you can see immediately what your risk of flooding is and what measures you can take. But whether people have taken those measures, I think at the moment we're all kind of a little bit complacent. We have a lot of faith in our flood defences, And I think we need to target our communication at moments when people are feeling most vulnerable. So straight after a big flood event, then you start thinking, oh, maybe I should have my, all the things in house because I might end up being here and not being able to leave for the next few days. I admit I don't even have a grab bag ready to go if I need to be evacuated. So I think we need to think about that, and we need to give people advice on making their homes more resilient, but we also need to be aware of inequalities. I think this was mentioned earlier. For example, homeowners, people with high incomes are more able to make their homes climate-proof, are more able to organize an evacuation. So we need to make sure that it's not just the onus on the individual, but also, on the community level, and so make sure we know where those vulnerabilities are. And in terms of building resilience, of course, there's a lot of opportunities in the measures that we take on climate adaptation. For example, green and blue measures in the urban environment can all enhance our mental health. So I think that's the opportunity there to maximize those benefits for mental health when we're redesigning our urban environments to be climate resilient.
Great. If you were to score yourself as a country, right, the Netherlands, where would you place yourself in terms of learning from the flooding that happened on the agenda you're discussing?
I think we've certainly learned. I think we've now got more measures in place. I think I'm actually more concerned now about droughts, because I think the Netherlands is so used to flooding and managing water, getting rid of water. I think Elena mentioned the room for the rivers. We're providing a lot of room for the floodplains, and we're realizing now they're actually getting hotter and drier summers. That's our recent scenarios have shown that, and we're not so well prepared for drought and for all the health effects of drought.
Yeah, okay.
So I think that's the next big challenge, is kind of a transition in the way we manage water to actually hold on to it as well and ensure a good water quality, because you get concentration of contaminants in the water that we use to extract for drinking water. We know that water availability is going to be a problem, drinking water availability. We've done some scenario studies on that. So I think now we're learning from flooding, but we also need to be focusing on the effects of drought.
Yeah, what we mustn't do, I suppose, what you're saying from that is
mental
it's
health,
ever
of course, farmers, I think that was mentioned as
ever
well.
so present, is that it seems to be the type of climate impact we have, as opposed to looking at it across the board. So wildfires are going to be there, tornadoes, etc. So it can't just be about water and flooding, and then think, oh, let's talk about drought. And I think that's the mentality we need to shift. Now over to you. Thank you for that. We have a moment to engage you. You are here for a purpose, I hope. Not only to listen, but also to engage. So what questions or issues would you like to raise? Are you startled by the report? Have you got a key question about the report? Do you think, what do you think about it and what you've heard from people so far? Colleagues, so I'll take 2 or 3. Please do introduce yourself. So there's that gentleman there and another gentleman. Can we have some of the women put their hands up too, please?
Hello, yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Kostas Tervenis. I'm in the IT industry, but back in the Stone Age, I used to be a chemical engineer who worked as an environmental engineer for a major utility. So this is like a hobby. Oh, and I have the UNFCCC as a client, so I've always been peripheral to this. I want to express some disappointment. The report was excellent, and it was very targeted and political and accurate, and it's wonderful. But it's like a clinical analysis of a corpse when somebody has killed, the victim.
Ouch.
Yes. Mr. Kanani mentioned something about having an integral approach, including all aspects. So back in 1972, there was this famous report that we all tend to forget called The Limits to Growth, which predicted everything that's happening now with startling accuracy. And when they were referring to the effects of climate change, they didn't limit it to climate change. They were talking about pollution. So when I saw your report on water and health, I expected to hear the word microplastics in there somewhere, and that all this man-made effect on the climate change, because it's not entirely man-made, but it is the factor that swings it, is a result of the fossil fuel industry, which we're not seeing also in the report. So my plea to you, and I will close my statement, is you have the power. Make the statement. Assume an integral approach, as Mr. Kanani said. If we do not address the problem, then you're looking at a clinical anatomist report of a dead body, and I'm not interested. I want you to solve and attack the people who are causing this. Thank you.
Okay, wow. Powerful statement, gentlemen there.
Thank you. My name is Jorgo Riss. I work with Greenpeace, the campaigning organization. Thank you very much for this report. I have not read this one yet. I'm very much looking forward to it. But the previous one on the European climate risk assessment was very useful. So in general, the work that your agency is doing and everyone associated with it is really important and useful. I have a question, because I haven't read it yet. Listening to you, I was wondering whether you focused only on the human species, or whether you've also looked at the impact on other animals. And of course, I'm asking because of the cascading effects, effects of droughts and floods on other animals, anything really, from soil, organisms to pollinators, etc. Elena was speaking about the need to look at this systemically, and if we really want to check what we're likely to face, then we must take water, air, and soil for what they are, the produce of organisms 24/7, rather than static resources that get affected by certain levels of temperature. So that's my question. Okay. Other animals, to what extent are they the subject of in this report? And if not in this report, then hopefully maybe in the next one. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give you the mic for the right to reply, Lina.
Thank you. And of course, I have my best experts also in the room, but what I see there from their body language is that no, it has not been easy to incorporate everything in this report. And I take also your comment on the need to also, of course, bring the pollution aspects. The zero pollution agenda is very much related when we talk about the water and water quality. And I'm afraid, indeed, we have only focused on the one animal species, so human species, in this report. But you are right. Of course, these are all interlinked. Sometimes, of course, when making a report, we have to scope it. And I think here the scope has been indeed on human health. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Guy, I'm going to go to you now, if I may. You've done a lot of work in this area. Tell us where you think we are in terms of understanding the climate change related impacts on health.
Okay, thank you, Dharmendra. Can I confirm, can you hear me?
Absolutely, very well, thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. First of all, I just again would like to express an appreciation of the report. And actually, as somebody who spent 16 years working in policy, I particularly appreciated the nuance and the policy nuance within the report. And I suppose a realization that you cannot resolve everything all at one time. So I think the authors did a great job in that regard. In terms of where we are in relation to how much do we know about climate change effects on health more broadly and specifically through water, I would say we are very much at the start of a journey. So we have some understanding about how climate change may affect both infectious and non-communicable disease. We have some understanding how it may affect physical health, injury, and mental health. But I don't think we are anywhere close to really understanding the full potential nature of the impacts that may play through on health. So, to give you some examples, we've heard about West Nile fever today. We know dengue is beginning to encroach up into Europe. We know that there will be changes in the way the threats from different waterborne pathogens, but we don't know enough yet really about how the scale of the problem will emerge, on over what timeframes and how quickly we need to respond. So there is an ongoing need to really invest in linked water and health and climate research so that we really understand what we think is going to happen in relation to that. So that partly means bringing the climate science community back very much into these discussions. It's interesting when I read the report. It does read a report. It's written by some people who understand about health and some people who understand about water. I wasn't necessarily convinced that there was a strong evidence of some people who really understood the climate science and where climate change may take us. And that's important because the scenarios that you have, where you end up in terms of a changing climate, will have a profound influence, I think, on health. So there needs to be ongoing investment. We all have our pet areas that we would like to research more in. I'm particularly interested around how you understand how changes to engineered systems will lead to increased risks from a range of microbial pathogens. I'm also very interested in understanding insect vectors and how that will change with climate change and what that will mean for us developing mitigation strategies in a continent that by and large has not had to think about how we control mosquito-related disease for a very long time. But picking up on a couple of things that both I think Oliver and Lena mentioned. So yes, it's true, things like the risk management plans of climate, water safety plans and sanitation safety plans could be helpful, but they are not in and of themselves sufficient. We need to be thinking more ambitiously about how we would engage in investment strategies to upgrade our water supplies, upgrade our sanitation systems, because actually yes, management is a big part of it, but we need to think about long-term investment. And just picking up on the mental health area, because it's an area that we look at quite a lot at Bristol. I think absolutely mental health is probably the biggest single consequence you see of flooding, probably worldwide, specifically in the European context. It undoubtedly is. What we should not get distracted by is our main response being about a psychosocial services being made available. Yes, they will be important. Yes, it's important to ensure that they are there. But unless we invest in upstream investments that reduce the drivers of that mental ill health, we will actually not make a difference. So that really does mean, picking up on some of the issues that Lena was talking about, actually, we need to think about inequity. We need to think about how do you get insurance products that actually work for low-income private renters who are in houses that landlords are not necessarily going to invest in. And how do we do the upstream, both infrastructural and financial instruments that will help reduce that threat? So I think the short answer is, I think there's a long way to go about fully understanding the impacts on climate.
Thank you for that. So one of my concerns is that we've got public debt now as a result of the past 4 years, the highest levels ever in history. And I suppose decision makers are going to have to make stark choices here, right? And we know we're not very good at prevention. We're better at cure and dealing with the problem at the hand, but it almost like we have to have adversity in the system to be able to make us act, as we saw in COVID. Get on that note, I want to come to you. You work with a range of stakeholders across the piece. From your perspective, what kind of support do decision makers need to build resilience into the system, especially related to the climate change impact on water?
I think you've made a good comment right now, saying it's difficult to go to move from response or emergency actions towards preparedness and precaution, or prevention. I think that's the big step Europe has to take, which has not been taken yet. Emergency action or emergency support needs to be decreased somehow or disincentivized, because otherwise we simply rely on the emergency situation taking place. I've been working last week in one of the regions in Europe, in Southern Europe, dealing with drought and water scarcity. They were just waiting what was happening, and then when the drought popped up, then suddenly everybody does something in order to claim that they are responding, but they hadn't been prepared for it at all. And I mean, they should have known from all the previous assessments since a long time ago, 20 years at least, that something like this would be happening. It's important. I mean, in the report, there are lots of measures for the preparedness to strengthen it. And I think these needs to be further developed. And there are other guidelines which are available. For example, the infrastructure climate proofing, which is great. We do have the do no significant harm. We have we have under the Water Framework Directive implementation strategy, I think we have now 40 guidance documents. Many of them might look a little bit like a tick box. So we just do it and we don't really believe what we put into it. So we need to strengthen, we need to take the good practice, which is in this report and other reports. And by the way, this report, I find it a great report, a great stock-taking report. I've seen I mean, I'm working a lot on climate scarcity, on floods, and I have never seen so much health information stock taking being brought together. So in this sense, it's really helpful to know where we are. So this needs to be passed to those who can act to enable the mainstreaming with capacity building on the good practice, but also on the failures. We have to learn about the failures. And when I say mainstreaming, maybe it's not, I mean, for example, in one of the flood risk assessments, we have seen that there are authorities which enable you, if you buy a property, you can put in your cadastral code, and then you can see whether it's in a flood risk area or not. But maybe that's not enough mainstream, but who knows this? Because maybe what we need is that the cadastral information is changed and updated with the flood information, so that when you buy a flat, which is in one of these 12% areas or a new one, which is shocking data, that you have to look at this information. It's not that you get it maybe if you know where to look, you just get it. This is the mainstreaming we still need. We have to go to get to the local authorities, to the other authorities, which can handle this information properly. And it won't work if we don't penalize, if we don't have clear, which is a no-go, for example, for the climate proofing. So we need enforcement. I mean, here, the Commission has the role as the watchdog. The Commission has to see whether things are appropriately implemented. I'm living in Spain, so I've seen lots of problems with the nitrates directive. Finally, we got a court case, but I mean, it took us how many? 2 decades, 3 decades? And the same happens with illegal wells in the Doñana wetlands, so also for a decade there. I mean, maybe with the Environmental Crime Directive, we get a little bit more traction there, but it takes simply too long. And then capacity building is also needed for the judges, for example. They cannot understand all these complex water health issues, which even for me, much of things were new in that report. So it's very easy to link the floods with the injuries or with the, I was also shocked by the 11% of the hospitals built in flood risk areas. I mean, this simply should not have happened. And I'm really keen to see in a follow-up how this is being translated into language which regional authorities understand. I'm working one of the climate adaptation projects with the authority in Croatia, and they very often say, oh, this is nice EU buzzword, but we really don't know what we have to do on site. So can we translate this somehow so that we exactly know what it means? And I think that there's a lot of work which needs to be done to really make it much more handleable, manageable, and useful. And much of the information is there. And in this report, there are great case studies, great examples of what can be done.
Thank you. It's interesting is that, there's a body of case law now emerging, isn't there, of individuals. So in the UK, you had the case of the young girl who died, and there was been a recognition that it was about pollution, it's about with quality of air. And we've had other cases, and I know there are groups of people across the world mounting new claims about, I suppose, seeing the fact that being safe and secure in a climate change context is a human right. And leaders are increasingly being held accountable. But let's see where that goes. Colleagues, we have excellent. Sorry, I'm saying that because it's 2 women put their hands up rather than having more men. But that's nothing against the men. Just want to make sure there's balance. So first you, and then we also have someone online. Is that right? 3rd woman. Great. Please.
Thank you very much. Francesca Liggi from the Red Cross EU office. We are very pleased with the focus on the relation between climate, environment, and health that the EU, the member state, and the Commission are putting in this later years, let's say. We see advances also at international level with the Health Day at COP28. It was a big success. The question is, the report is focusing mainly in intra-EU policy making, best practices and advances that we can take. But is any intention to keep this priority first, of course, for the EU member state, but also in bilateral, multilateral, and external cooperation? I mean, it will be a priority. I hope it will remain a priority at international level, and we will be glad to see this strong focus from the member state and the Commission, also in external relations.
It'd be good to see it as a part of the global gateway financing, no? And we know that development aid goes out there, but it's kind of bite-sized and ad hoc. It doesn't do the thing.
Fact.
If you're in Africa, you are so used to droughts, you just pick up and move. You know, you have to. It's a kind of resilience.
We talk
unfortunately.
about structural changes for now is still a bit in silos, both from policy framework and then also investment framework.
Very good point. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Liv Heinrich. I'm currently not employed, so I'm representing myself.
Great.
I have a question.
Good.
I have a
Such
question.
freedom.
Yeah, freedom, true. I have a question about intersectionality. So you talked a little bit about poorer communities versus wealthier people. In 2021, in the floods in Germany, there were 3 disabled people who died because they could not evacuate. What is the inclusion of disabled persons' needs in evacuation, for example, but also in the prevalence of diseases, for example, for people who have autoimmune disease or people with mental health struggles? We discuss mental health prevention. Is there a specific inclusion of other people's needs, or is it very able-bodied mainstream? Thank you.
What's your sense? How do you feel it is at the moment, from your perspective?
Unfortunately, probably not very good. Yeah.
Okay. Frightening thoughts that you're putting in our minds when we think about people, in a wheelchair, in a top of the building, somewhere in a flat. What are they going to do? Lady here, in the glasses blonde hair.
Hi, my name is Björk Palsutter from the Training for Health Equity Network. Thank you for a great report, but it just seems like we're seeing a lot of reports and sort of analysis of the situation. But I think, to your point before, who owns the problem? Don't we need to have climate, health, equity involved in everything? And how do we incentivize it and actually enforce it? And it seems to be easy to kind of throw the potato to whoever is at hand, but nobody seems to really be taking leadership.
What would you like to see happen? So, do you want a czar in place in the new commission? Do you want a new agency? Do you want,
Not a new agency,
right?
Somehow, kind of, closer collaboration. It seems like there's some great collaboration starting, which is great, but there's more sectors involved, and I think there also has to be tracking. There has to be some sort of way where we're constantly monitoring what's going on, and then incorporate this into everything. See, the equity issue, are we looking at the most vulnerable? Are we always looking at potential health consequences? And climate, it's there. We need to look at whether it's about training of health workers, or if it's about, any engineering, etc. I mean, it's a whole of society, and no easy solution, but I think we have to act.
But at the end of the day, it's politics that will matter, unfortunately. But we'll go to that in June. 1 second, we've got someone online. So our dear colleague, thank you.
Thank you, Dharmendra. We have a question from Luc Ba from the Belgian Climate and Environment Risk Assessment Center, asking a question very much connected to the topic of management that was mentioned before by the panel. The question is, how do we keep in mind the underlying reduced resilience to climate change caused by previous and current bad environmental management? Thank you very much.
Gosh, all very difficult ones, right? They're not easy, but this isn't an easy issue. I'm not going to ask you to answer all these questions. What I want to do is, I'd like to use but I want you to incorporate it, if you like, into, because none of you are, individually responsible or accountable for it, but you'll have views. But I want to move into kind of some of the issues around, it's what some of our colleagues are saying in the room. Great words, good report, but what now? What are the practical things that need to happen? So what are the concrete steps that will turn this fine report into something that makes us perceptibly feel something's happening? So Guido, I want to turn to you first. In terms of money, what kind of investments do you think are required? There's a lot of money in the system, right? We know that the Resilience and Recovery Fund that's been created, one of the largest pots of money, it's not sufficiently being used at member state level at the moment. It's sitting in banks, earning interest.
If I can spend the EU money, I mean, that's a great opportunity. I would definitively give a big share of it to better monitoring. I've been working in Portugal over the past month, and there is a strong concern about how treated urban wastewater that is cleaned up, might be used afterwards. And it's not about using it only for agriculture, because there is already an EU regulation in place and it should work quite well, but we need some monitoring there and we need reporting of what's happening actually. But there's a strong concern about using this for recharging aquifers, which was one of the aspects Alina was mentioning, for example, that recharging aquifers can help us afford droughts and water scarcity. But if this is done in a way where there's no proper monitoring of which water quality goes in there, then we have failed. The aquifer cannot really be used any longer for drinking water, or with the corresponding risks on health and on costs as well. So there's a lot where we need better monitoring on who uses the water, how do we use the water, the status of water bodies. There was the online question of how much should we do better on environmental performance. And I mean, on the water management, it's rather clear that there has not been much progress over the past 6 years in doing things better. So this is something, as I said before, we need better guidance, we need better support, we need financing, of course, for some activities, but we need the monitoring and then the enforcement as well.
Indeed, absolutely. I suppose, I mean, when you look at that, my only example most recently is the UK, where we've seen that the water authorities have behaved appallingly, and only finding out after the event. And still, Parliament has a conversation, but is anyone charged with the act of actually polluting water systems?
And to add, I mean, monitoring doesn't mean that somebody has to go to the water body and take the monitoring there. I mean, there's a lot which you can do with modern technologies. I mean, all the digital transformation, there are some great examples on how this works. It's much more efficient. So let's not only think in what has happened, how monitoring looked like a decade ago. This is really moving forward.
Yeah.
Lots of the Horizon projects, of the activities under research and under the climate mission, for example, they can also be used for improving these aspects.
Indeed, but we need, I suppose, the private sector's key to this, isn't it, in certain ways? How do you make prevention profitable? And how do you make solutions profitable? Because once we do that, once we monetize the fact that actually there's a cost of inaction, but actually by prevention, the public saves money. The public saves money, and therefore you can actually make profit out of it as well. Without not being kind of crude, but there's a reality of we don't have time. We don't have time in our system. I want to move, Elizabeth, to you in terms of what steps should be taken in terms of risk education and communication on this agenda.
Well, I think in terms of the public health sector, we need to make sure we have, I think I mentioned it earlier, a good national risk assessment of vulnerability assessments. We know what the risks are, we know what the vulnerabilities are, and then we can educate our workforce. We should have climate change and health in the curricula of public health sciences, medical curricula, nursing, so people are well educated on that. We need more peer-to-peer sharing of knowledge. But I also think it's very important that once we've got that good foundation, that good basis, that we go out there and we have much more intersectoral communication, because a lot of the impacts on health are due to actions on climate taken in other sectors. So we need to make sure that those sectors realize what the possible unintended consequences can be of what they're doing on health, or how they can maximize the benefits for health. And that's where we need to be on board. We need to get out of our comfort zones. We need to be out there talking to the urban planners, the water managers, etc., to make sure we're maximizing the effects on physical and on mental health.
Do you think?
For example, we've made a tool in the Netherlands for water managers, the urban planners, on what you need to do when you want to design and maintain an urban water feature. So you minimize microbiological contamination. So it's a really nice online tool, with sort of a checklist that they can go through, designed for them to use. And we're developing another tool, a little bit more detailed tool on quantitative risk assessment on microbiological contamination of water. So these are the sort of things I think we need to do more of, to develop these simple things for other sectors, and do it with them as well, so we're answering their needs.
Thank you.
I didn't answer your question. Your second question.
It sort of does. I suppose, when we think about the fact that most people aren't prepared, they don't know what's going to happen to them, and they have no sense of the reality that this room does not represent 80% of the population out there. Especially those who are poor and living in the conditions they are. And how do they make sense of this? And how do we prepare that education? I suppose, where do we get, let's say, 10,000 ambassadors to do TikTok videos about importance of this? For example, I know it sounds bizarre, but TikTok is the thing that people are using, especially the younger generation, and they will matter. They matter in this. Yeah, if you talk about human capital, they really matter in terms of change. But I'm not expecting you to have the answer to all this question. But thank you very much, Elizabeth. Guy, I'm going to go to you. What needs to happen to close the knowledge gap that you've referred to?
Can I just respond back, just before I answer that question, just picking up on just what you were just saying about how we communicate to people. I think, yes, we do need to communicate with individuals. Yes, we do need to make people aware of risk. But one thing that does always concern me is the degree to which we are trying to shift responsibility away from governments and public authorities back to private individuals and say, well, you should be aware of this problem, you should fix it. Actually, that's not what we should be doing. We should be very clear that governments, local or national, have a responsibility to their populations and should be willing to invest in larger interventions and not put everything back down onto individuals. And also, apologies, Elizabeth, I called you Elena in my last response, and I didn't mean to do that, but picking up on the mental health responses. In terms of closing the knowledge gap, I mean, I think we do need to have some very clear, quite targeted research calls that now try to focus on some of the very specific issues that we face around the climate-water health interface. So that could look at infectious vector-based diseases. You could have a stream that would look at how water quality threats will change with time. For instance, you could actually genuinely have a program about how flooding, climate change, mental health, and how you respond to that as a call. And the reason why I'm saying that is that there is a lot of money at the moment around for funding for research around climate change and health. So the Wellcome Trust, for instance, has £1 billion investment program to fund research in this area. Horizon 2020 will have funds, it also has funds, lots of funders do. At the moment, I would say there is a massive focus on heat as being the major health consequence of climate change. And so there's lots and lots of money going into heat adaptation plans. And I'm involved with some projects about how you adapt housing, and it's all great, it's all lovely. But heat is not the only game in town.
Exactly.
So my call really would be to research funders is to look more broadly and really look at how we scope out some very clear programs that start to look at how the water environment will start to affect. Yes, flooding, also drought. I think it's really interesting that the issues have been pulled up on drought. We did a review for WHO actually in the Western Pacific recently, and if you look across mental health outcomes there, impacts of drought on mental health of farmers, for instance, in Australia, is probably greater than the mental health impacts of flooding, and is probably equivalent to when people are being exposed to major windstorms and the threat that poses. I think consistently we underestimate the importance of drought. Yes, it's about hygiene, but it is very much also about how you concentrate pollution, how you concentrate chemicals, both man-made and natural, and how that changes risk profiles significantly. So I think that there's a need for a real water, climate, health research program that looks at infectious disease, non-communicable disease, and mental health.
Thank you.
Basically, more money for academics to do more research.
Yeah, I know you're going to say that. But we need to have both. No. Research is key. We know that. It's absolutely key. As long as it leads to innovation practice. But the thing is, we need to do two things at once, don't we? We need to act now whilst we learn more. And we don't have the luxury of doing it sequentially. That's the issue. Oliver, last but not least, collaboration is key, as we know, on this. And this report that you've led shows what's possible when you bring two different types of disciplines and multiple disciplines together. But actually, we need that in practice. What can you do at WHO to promote the importance of collaborative practice?
Thank you. I also take the liberty not to answer the question in the first place, but to respond to some.
There's such an unruly bunch. There's no discipline.
It is on cooperation. It is on cooperation. Some people said reports, but then what? I think we need to empower more than ever before also local actors and local decision makers to bring them on board on what solutions they can actually implement at the local level. I remember when the mayor of Cesena was speaking last year on the Ministerial Conference on Environment and Health in Budapest. He came to stage and his community was just badly flooded with zillions of damages, several people dying, and he was standing on stage saying in public, our region was first hit by a drought, and afterwards torrential rains were falling on the dry ground, and the whole city was flooded. And he was saying, I didn't know what to do. And it was a desperate call actually also for empowering local authorities and decision makers to equip them with solutions and tools that they can implement at the local level.
Exactly.
And I think that is at the interface of knowledge at the local level, but also in translating the findings of the dead body into practical solutions on the local level. So that requires a significant investment beyond research. When we speak about the multilateral level, there was also a question here in the room, what can WHO do? Well, together with our partners in UNECE, we are hosting a multilateral instrument for this region, which is called the Protocol on Water and Health, which has a very strong strand of work on climate change, water, sanitation, hygiene, and health, combining these topics. And what we do under this protocol, we are working with governments, with national governments from different sectors, environment, water, and health, together in using the instrument for national target setting. But that is an important instrument so that governments formulate of what they want to do in this space. But even more important, perhaps, we engaged under this mechanism into one-to-one interactions in governments actually, and how they can convene relevant stakeholders at the national level and to bring them around the table to work towards common solutions, bringing the different sectors around the table, which is a given in many countries, but not in all countries in our region. So that is also an essential ingredient to use these multilateral platforms to convene various sectors and to organize these conversations at the European level, but also at the national level. There was a comment on COP. 5 seconds
On this last bit, yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned
There was a comment on COP 28, its health program. We were very proud of this. It created significant momentum, particularly for the health sector. But there was also a corner at COP on water, right? So, but these communities were not necessarily talking to each other at COP. So I think at COP29 in Baku, we should also make an effort to mainstream the water agenda into the health discussion and to bring that squarely into that space and vice versa. And we are currently working on that, and we will be happy to engage stakeholders in the room also in this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you. I think people will be really kind of shocked, those out there who know nothing about this, that actually, are we really having this conversation about water and the fact that it's not being seen as central to our livelihoods and our societal resilience? It is, absolutely. But, you know, there we go. I wanted to clarify one point, Guy, about the risk education. I think there's an absolute difference between holding public authorities to account. But I think what I meant about TikTok and risk education is, how do you make sure the most vulnerable or those out there on the streets feel prepared to know what to do, rather than feel like abandoned and insecure and vulnerable? And I think education in terms of knowing what you can do is absolutely key, and we mustn't lose sight of that. I will take you as a last, no, absolutely, don't worry, just the last question there. I hope it's a not too big a question, because I'm not going to let them answer it, by the way, but I'll let you speak.
That's great, thanks. I talk on behalf of EWOSHA, so we are the Workers' Safety and Health Agency in Europe, and that's why I really want to take this opportunity to make a plea about, we are talking about vulnerable groups, and I don't know if it's in the mind, I don't know what is the lenses of this report in thinking about workers as being really a vulnerable group. They are particularly in relation to water, there are floods, you have frontline medical workers, you have drought, which may lead to wildfires, you have firefighters at the front line, and we really think that workers should be taken and as a public health issue, like to break a little bit this kind of silos thinking about occupational health and public health, and I would like to know what is your perspective in this report, if it is considered somehow, or otherwise I hope that we can work more together in embedding this.
I'm getting nods from the experts who were involved in the report saying yes, it was considered. So you'll read it and you'll see that it's there. And if you don't think it's sufficient, get in touch with them and tell them what they should do. But I think, thank you. I'm so glad I brought you in because you're so right. We have overlooked it's the frontline workers, whether it's accident and emergency in hospitals, whether it's ambulance people, the firefighters, etc. They need to be able to have the sense of preparedness of knowing, because most of that they don't. They're just going into an emergency and a risk situation. So thank you very much for bringing that. I need to conclude because you have coffee and lunch out there for you, as a kind of a thank you for being here, obviously, as well. But listen, there's a big vote coming up in June, as you know. And you're all citizens, by the way, as you know. Use it. Let's hope that, the early signs, it's almost like climate change and actions on climate change has become as demonized and weaponized as migration. And, I've seen that in the conversations happening right now. And let's hope that, people sufficiently feel strong that it shouldn't be weaponized and demonized as something that you become fluffy and wasting of public money. And what you need to really tackle is, migration and move further to the right. That vote is going to be important to signal the future of Europe at a critical time. The next 5 years are going to matter. If you think last 5 years were a bit of a roller coaster, wait. And I'm not the doomsayer here, but we know. In the next 6 months, you will experience climate in a way you never had before. We just see it. We look at last year, it got worse, and the year before it got worse. It'll get worse this year. And, we are going to be in that situation where resilience, preparedness is going to be absolutely central. And somehow, I wish we could put banners on the streets. Prevention matters. Because prevention is so much more important as a public policy discipline than anything else at the moment that we're living through. And let's hope that, all of you can kind of pump that story and that narrative wherever you are. So thank you for being here. If you want to follow up on these themes and discussions, mark the date of 25th of June, where we're going to have our Sustainable Livelihoods Summit. Because all of that we're talking about is about sustainable livelihoods. And we'll be going to have a big conversation on the 25th about all of this. And today, if you want like 2 for 1, you can come back here in the afternoon where I'll be interviewing and having a conversation with Nicola Schmidt, the potential candidate for replacing Ursula von der Leyen. So if you're interested in that, kind of spikes your interest, come back here. You're more than welcome. It's at about 4:30. You can do that. A final point is I'd like to draw your attention to this report. And if you want more copies of it, they're at the back. This is something that we've produced, which is our 10 policy choices for a renewed social contract. We've done this specifically to create policy choices for the new mandate ahead of us. And in there, writ large, is prevention. As a key mantra, almost a policy discipline. But also in this, we're setting out what needs to happen in terms of achieving greater coherence at the vice president level, so EU reform, but also practice on the ground. So I hope this will interest you. Please look at it and promote it, because we're saying here is that the conversation we've had today is about a social contract between the public, private, and civil society. We should have expectations of each other. And don't forget, tax and public finance is a driver of everything in terms of a renewed social contract. So we need to be mindful that, all our taxes go to creating a form of society. What we should be choosing is a better society. And on that note, thank you very much. Thank you all our contributors for being here and being able to speak, I suppose, frankly and openly about the challenges. And we've had some solutions as well. And thank you for being here to present the report. Thank you for being here, because actually, if you weren't here, this wouldn't be worthwhile. Whilst the speakers are important, you make this important. Thank you all very much. Take care and have lunch and coffee outside. Thank you very much.